So we're about to start what I think is one of the most powerful and important sections of this entire textbook. If you look back 20 years from now and you're like, yeah, I took this on-course class and the one thing I learned about being assertive. If that's what you say 20 years from now, I'll view that as a huge personal victory. Because in my life, when I reflect on it, and I feel like I've had a lot of amazing experiences, both my wife and I, the information covered in this section is probably one of the most critical aspects to that that's opened so many doors and allowed us to achieve so many of our own personal goals and dreams. So the section will cover how essentially you respond to different situations. When you encounter a challenge in life, do you choose to be a victim? In this case, it's going to expand on that, like by blaming and placating, blaming, pointing the finger at other people and saying it's their fault why this didn't work out, or I wouldn't be here if blah, 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 blah. Or placating is the opposite, and it's saying, I'm not worthy of this situation and I'm not good enough and all you guys are better than me, and letting essentially people steamroll you because of your lack of self-worth and not achieve your goal and dream. Versus what creators do. And the book will expand upon that. Previously we talked about how creators show ownership and that they also are solution oriented, but more importantly, and the new information we're adding is about leveling, and leveling is how they communicate. And leveling is about being honest to yourself and expressing what you need and being assertive with it. And if you do those things, you'll find in any situation when you're encountering other people, you're going to be more successful. Another part of this unit is we have a discussion forum. I ask you to tell a creator story. And by a creator story, I want you to think back in your life and think back to a key moment. And there must be something that you feel proud about where you acted like a creator, where you either leveled or you were solution oriented and dealt with a difficult situation and got the outcome, the goal you wanted achieved. And I want it to be specific. And so I'm going to tell you two stories here, one kind of large story and one small story to kind of really elaborate what I mean and what I'm looking for out of that journal. So the large story will actually be one from my wife. And what happened to her? So my wife is an elementary school teacher now, and she's always wanted to be an elementary school teacher. In fact, she knew since the third grade she wanted to be an elementary school teacher. And so there she was, fresh out of school. She had her teaching certificate, and she wanted to go get a job teaching. And as many of you may know, that like getting your first job when you have no experience is pretty tricky, because who wants to hire a teacher who's never really taught? And more importantly, my wife wanted to kind of dream big. And so she was a passionate skier. She had skied her whole life. And so she wanted to move to a ski town. And she found this school up called Vail Mountain School, which is a private school out in the Vail Valley in Colorado. And it is the dream school. I mean, it literally costs $20,000 a year to send your child to the Vail Mountain School. And it's an elementary through high school. For elementary school, 20 grand. And it's such a dreamlike place that they even have ski Fridays where the entire school, teachers and students, all go skiing together on Fridays through the whole winter. So my wife heard about that and said, that's for me. Like, she was excited. So she called up the school and talked to the headmaster and said, hey, my name is Sarah. I'd really like to work there. And she explained her situation. And you know what the headmaster said? We got no jobs. And Sarah was like, oh, but so decision point one, she could just say thank you and hang up the phone and be a placater. I said, oh, I'm not good enough. This is never going to happen. I'm sorry to waste your time. Or she could be a creator. And she said, well, she came up with a solution. She said, you know what? I'm actually going to come out there and I'm going to be out there and, in a couple weeks. And I'd love just to meet you. And, if you could just spare a few minutes, and meet me in person. You know what the headmaster said? Don't come. And then that was the end of that. So at the end of the phone call, Sarah was like, huh. But she said, this is really important to me. I really want to work out the school. And it just so happened she had a friend who worked at the school. So she drove out there and stayed with her friend, who was also a teacher at the Vail Mountain School. And so she spent several days out there and just started meeting the other teachers because, teachers all, after work, they often hang out together. And she got to know them. And the more she saw the school, she's like, this is for me. This is my dream school. I really want to work here. So she just started meeting people, shaking hands, getting involved. And to the point where she was actually there during the last week of school. You know what she did? She bought a dress and went to graduation. There she was. She didn't know anybody besides the folks she just met for the week. And, this kind of friend of a friend. that she'd known for a few, for a little while from back home, and she attended the graduation. She again, and after all that, after attending the graduation and being there for a week, she went back to the headmaster and said, "Hey, this is my dream school. I'd really like to work here." And you know what the headmaster said this time? "Come see me tomorrow, and we'll give you an interview." And she got the job. So the moral of that story, and I want you to have a moral to your own story as well when you tell one, was for her was don't take the first no as a final no. If she'd done that, she never would have gotten the job. But instead, she focused as a creator and realized that the first no doesn't always mean no. People will just kind of tell you no offhand. They don't want to be bothered. They're busy. They don't really know who you are. So instead, she decided to use it as an opportunity to show her character, to show her persistence, how much it mattered to her. And that turned it around. So that's often true in life. If you just give up on the first no, that's no. But if you give it a shot, maybe something will happen, and it often does. So the second story I'll share is a more minor one, and this one is my story, and it came from a few years ago. My wife and I bought a house, and the house had no gas in it, no like natural gas. Everything was electric. Electric stove, electric hot water heater, electric heat, and that really bummed me out because I like to cook. And as you may know, anybody who's a serious cook really likes to cook on gas. It's just better in so many ways. You get a higher heat, you can really sear with it. So I called up the gas company, Atmos Energy here, and they told me it's going to be $1,800 to run a gas line to my house. And I was like, oh, I just bought the house. I'm a teacher. Like, I don't have $1,800 to spend just because I like cooking on gas. So, I kind of shelved that dream there for a while because it wasn't practical. But then, a couple of years later, I hear that they're got to do some work on my street, and they got to replace the master gas line that runs down the whole street. So I was like, interesting. And so, sure enough, the day comes, and all the Atmos Energy trucks are there because they're starting the project. So I walk up to them, and the first guy I see, I said, "Hey, my name's Chris. I live in that house over there," and I point to my house down the street, and I said, "I'd really love to have a gas line," and the guy's like, "Oh, sounds great, but there's nothing I can do to help you." And because he's just the guy who drives the truck, it turns out he couldn't really do anything for me. But I was like, hey, who can? Who's kind of in charge here? Who's the supervisor of the project? And he's like, "Oh, that's Troy." I'm like, "Well, is there any chance I can talk to Troy?" And he's like, "Oh, actually, turns out he's going to be here in half an hour." So sure enough, half an hour I come back, and I get introduced to Troy. And I say, and Troy's the supervisor. I say, "Hey, Troy, my name's Chris. I live in that house down over there, and I'd really love a gas line, And I called up, and they told me it's going to be $1,800. But, you guys are here, and you're tearing up the street, and, is there anything you can do for me?" Troy looked at me and he said, "Let me get back to you tomorrow." And he took my phone number. And sure enough, Troy calls me up the next day. He says, "Chris, I got good news. We're going to give you a gas line. All you got to do is dig the trench. You dig a hole, we'll fill it with a gas line for you." And I was like, "Oh no, sweet." So, I get out my shovel and I start digging. And I get about 3 feet into it, and I was like, "This isn't going to work." So I go, call up a buddy who's a contractor, and I said, "How do I dig a hole?" And he's like, "Oh, you got to get a trencher." So I go down to the local rental, heavy equipment rental place, and I go rent a trench digger. Cost me, $150. And 2 hours later, I had my trench, and the next day, Atmos put in my gas line for free. So the whole thing cost me about $150 for the trench digger. So the moral of that story was, find the decision maker, because the guy who drove the truck, he couldn't help me. He doesn't have that kind of power. He just, collects his check and does what he's told. But there's somebody who does. There is always a person who ultimately is the boss, right? And the boss can make exceptions and make decisions. So you got to find out who the boss is, who's the power person. That in this case, that was Troy. In my wife's case, it was the headmaster. If she's just talking to the administrative assistant at the Vail Mountain School who answers the phone, they can't help her. But if you talk to the headmaster, that's the person who can hire you. So find that decision maker. And then once you get yourself in front of them, explain truthfully, in a leveling kind of way, what you want and how much it means to you. and be honest with that. So, with Troy, I explained who I was, I explained why I wanted a gas line. And in the end of it, these people with the power, they often want to help people. Inherently, they often are good people, if you approach them in the right way. And in the end, I realized that Troy felt good about helping me. He was like, yeah, I could tell you, he's like, he felt like he was really helping a guy out who like wanted gas but couldn't afford it. Troy has a little power in his life, and he was like, I did something good today. I helped somebody out. I could really feel, I got that real sense from him. So often life will present you with these situations. And if you can remember to be assertive, to not take the first no as the final no, to level with people and tell them what you want in an honest way when you're in front of that decision maker, good things will happen to you. So I could tell you several other stories from these from my life. And all of these are kind of key moments. But again, these lessons have steered me and my wife so well in achieving everything that we've wanted so far. And going forward is how we're going to continue to achieve the things that we want. Um, so I'd like you to think about this. Think about a story within your own life and send it to the discussion forum. And if you do well, you're going to get extra credit. So if you have any questions, please ask and read the chapter. And I'm looking forward to see what you write.